Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the first session of the day here at the Taste of Travel Theatre. We're talking about the really important issue today of in-flight payment fraud. A lot of people suggest that between 2 and 10% of in-flight sales are lost due to lost transactions, chargebacks, fraud, and the like. So we've got a really excellent panel of experts here today in in-flight retail, onboard technology, and fraud. So we'll be looking at some innovative solutions to help overcome the problem with a special focus on whether or not we should be trying to bring all of our payments online. Here to my left, we have Martin Cunnison, who is head of global sales for AirFi Leo, which is their low Earth orbit connectivity product. We have Livia Vitae, Chief Commercial Officer at Perseus. I haven't got a nutshell description for the company, but I'll let you get to that in a minute. And Manuel Hoopsman, Head of Retail for Europe at Retail in Motion. So to get things started off, I'll let everybody give a little introduction to themselves and their company, and why in-flight fraud is a subject that is of interest to them.
Great, hi. Thank you, Marianne. Hi, I'm Martin from AirFi, so nice to meet you all. AirFi, just a quick two seconds on us. We're a portable cabin technology company. We're in Hall B2, so come along and have a look at what we're doing. We started life in retail, in onboard point of sale. We stretched that out to an in-flight streaming connectivity product, which has become the largest one in the market. So if you're looking for low-cost and lightweight installations, that's our game. One of the key things missing in our product portfolio was connectivity. So back in 2018, before the dreaded pandemic, we started looking at whether we could replicate our sort of clever technology to get an onboard connectivity system in place, which is what we've now done. So we've come up with quite a cool solution, which instead of putting a hole in the plane, you just put two tiny little antennas in each window. That's one on each side of the plane, and you get connectivity to a level which is sufficient for you to run a number of key services. The first key service we're looking at is onboard payments. Most airlines are obviously doing a lot of onboard retail. I think the overall global market is around 6 to 7 billion is how much is sold on board through duty-free and food and bev, so it's a big marketplace. And this entire Mesa is doing a lot of work to get products on planes. What you're obviously seeing is most airlines are flying with an offline payment process. So unfortunately, the fraudsters have realized that they can use cards without credit on it and therefore defraud the airlines. Now, that problem, as Marianne said, is running around sort of 2 to 10% of overall sales. So this is a big problem, something in the region of 2 to 500 million of a problem every year. So we're out to try and stop that through providing an online connection on board through that low-cost connectivity. So thank you for that moment.
Hi. Hello. Yes. Can you hear me? Hi. Livia Vitae. I'm from Perseus. I'm quite new to this particular expo, my first time here. Normally I'm on the payments distribution side of the industry. At Perseus, what we look at is airline and travel fraud. So most of our community members are airlines as well as travel agents, but we've only traditionally looked at online payments because that's where you can really do that pre-authorization check. We're a company that was started for airlines, essentially by the airlines, when a group of 10 airlines in Europe said, hey, we realize that we're getting hit by different fraudsters. And actually, sometimes they realized it was the same. Is there a way that we can share that data so that when we get hit or the next person gets hit, they know not to accept the payment? IATA was not in a position to help, so we built the platform. It's a machine learning platform. We look at different data elements, the IP address, the email address, the name of the passenger, etc. So lots of different things. And we look at the patterns. And so we tend to sit in the pre-authorization process as part of the fraud management process. So we are not the sole fraud management part. And what we are very good at doing is picking up fraud crime rings. Because often fraud is not just somebody that's stolen a card off the internet and wants to have, some one-off benefit from it. Usually it's a cover for something much greater, which I'm sure that we'll cover later. So this is what we do. in terms of in-flight fraud, our airline members have often raised it in our community discussions. It's never been something that we could help them with because it's offline. So I was quite excited after having been approached again last year by a couple of airlines who actually decided to say maybe we can share our fraud data after the fact so that we can avoid having them hit other airlines. To know that we can actually bring online connectivity to aircraft without having to take the whole aircraft offline. So some really big opportunities to combat fraud in a very low margin industry.
Hi, my name is Manuel, and I'm with Retail Motion for over 6 years. We are the leading in-flight retail provider worldwide. So we work currently with over 30 different airlines. We process, you mentioned 6 billion before, we process over 1 billion. So we have a very large amount of transactions that we work with. We have an end-to-end platform so that we work with full value chain. Yeah? And the payment processing is one of our key parts. And fraud management has become a very serious issue for us as well. We've innovated and we have various different solutions, various stakeholders that we interact with. And so I'm very much looking forward to the talk because the topic is very much relevant.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a topic that I can't believe we're only just talking about this year at the show and that we haven't been talking about it so much in previous years because it is really important. How long has this problem been around? And would you say it's becoming more of a problem with different, technologies and tap payments and more sophisticated, I guess, online crime rings? Would you say that you've seen an uptick in this problem in recent years?
So 6 years ago, when we were dealing predominantly in cash, we had different forms of fraud that we're encountering, and that was mainly cash related. But post-COVID, when everything moved to the credit card payments, we've seen a steady increase of the fraud. And what we've also seen that as the increase is happening, the credit card schemes are becoming more and more restrictive in their actual processing. So we have different stakeholders lobbying and working towards passing on the fraud payments to different providers. So we have seen an increase. That's why I think it's really important that one combines the efforts. I mentioned before that we work with 30 different airlines, so we leverage very much our negotiation power here to make sure that it's not the airline that's suffering from those fraud payments, which you mentioned the percentage earlier is a significant amount of onboard retail.
Is a lot. Did you want to add something?
I was just going to say fraud in the airline industry and in the travel industry has long been a problem. So if you think about the fact that before ticketing used to be offline, so at IATA we used to have these rules where you would have to check the safe and make sure people were not stealing tickets, but you could only defraud them so fast, right? Because you can only write out as many tickets as you can. You know, when e-tickets became mandatory, so it was introduced in 1994, 2008 it was mandatory for all airlines to do e-ticketing, and same thing, you saw the fraud increase, and Perseus came about in 2009, so there you go, and this is because it goes online. So the second you see things go online, then you see an increase. So the same with payments. Second, it's e-commerce. We are an industry where it's very easy to do high volumes. It's low margin, and so the decisions have to be made very quickly. So ticketing was the first, and now, obviously, COVID has obviously kind of shown where our weaknesses are.
Right.
I was just going to add some anecdotal stories we heard from around the airlines in the last few weeks. I think, obviously, now airlines are doing duty-free sales, so cigarettes and alcohol, which weren't necessarily as prevalent a few years back. Certainly after Brexit, that became a thing on the British airlines. So it's high-value product, highly stealable. If you add on the sort of social media growth that we've seen, so as soon as someone realizes, I heard this story last week, that you can use a Costco card, and it goes on TikTok and it becomes viral, then all of a sudden everyone is using it and defrauding. So there's a lot of other activity that I think airlines are now having to manage, and ultimately no one really wanted to talk about it. I saw an article that was put up on a presentation from 2017 saying about this problem, and the little strapline said they'd probably fixed it by now, but here we are in 2024, we haven't. And I guess ultimately you don't want to talk about this because there wasn't a solution. So I think the solutions that guys like Manuel and everyone in that industry have been doing is to try and how can we work with a basically broken system to make it less broken. And now what we're going to try and do is fix the system and make it all online.
Okay, that kind of segues into the solution, but right before we start talking about solutions, I just wanted to know who pays for this at the end of the day. I know it does limit the creativity that airlines can have when it comes to their onboard programs. They might not want to sell things at such a high value in case it gets nicked. But in terms of, a retailer like yourself or the airline, or is it the credit card company, like who pays for this?
To be honest, I think it's a domino effect, right? So definitely, if the merchants are getting hit, they're going to want to. Well, I think you've got quite a good story on that one. In terms of when the airlines hit, they're not going to want to sell anymore. From a scheme perspective, so we work very closely with Visa and MasterCard. Their biggest issue is the fact that when it's offline, so when a card, the proper process for a card is that you have the card holder and their issuing bank, so the bank that issues your credit card has to authorize whatever transaction you do, right? And you want that to happen because you don't want just anybody using your card. When it's offline, that doesn't happen. So the chain is broken. So you can't go down the card holder fraud perspective. And so what it ends up happening is that the biggest chargeback reason, 10% actually, in the airline industry, is due to no authorization happening. And so even when it happens after the flight, there is a gap. So then the cost goes to, let's say in theory, the scheme / the issuing bank, but it gets passed on to the merchant, which then I'm guessing you guys have to, or the airlines have to pass it on to the consumer.
So this is the chain with an individual retailer. So what we've tried to do, as we are processing over 1 billion, is to go back and engage with the acquirer and say, well, we have an authorization from the passenger usually when they have the transaction, especially when it's a wallet transaction, a biometrical authorization. So it's actually something that you should be processing. So we are fighting back and we are actually moving that charge to these credit card schemes. Now, this is only possible because we do process the big amount of transactions. So I would say that a lot of the smaller retailers and a lot of the individual airlines are suffering from exactly those 10%.
Yeah, I think there's a huge cost across the chain, like Livia's saying. The indirect fallout is that some airlines have to switch off certain payment methods. So prepaid cards are taking over $1 trillion. They're 16% growth rate, I learned last week. So huge marketplace, and some airlines have had to say, look, if you've got a prepaid card, there's too much fraud risk attached, so we can't take it. So there's the direct cost, the impact on the P&L, but there's also the knock-on cost of things you can't do, ceilings, maximum spends per passenger. You're seeing crew members having to be the sort of front line on fraud. So I think there's a humongous cost across the piece, and this is why it's becoming such a big topic.
I would just add one thing though. It gets passed back to the scheme, but what I probably would want to see is that the cost is removed in the first place, because I think in our industry, well, I haven't been on the payments and distribution side for so long, it's not about where we shouldn't have the cost at all. If it's fraud, we should try to remove it, because passing it up the chain is not solving the problem, it's just pushing it to the other side.
Absolutely. Okay, let's start talking about solutions now. What is it that we can do still in an offline cabin environment to reduce the amount of fraud or to prevent it? And then let's talk about bringing the cabin online and how does that change the game?
So I'll start because I'm the only one doing offline, so to speak. So we actually do online and offline, but I'll start with the offline side. And what we've realized over the last years that we need to very much have a multi-stakeholder approach. So we work closely with the airline booking systems because we think there's some valuable data that we can gather here. We work with local police. We've had several successes with some airlines on a detective that's actually being able to identify fraud, because often it's organized crime, and that's why we think working with the local police has some impact there. We work with the cabin crews on board, as they are our salespeople, and they very much see the passenger, and they can identify fraud in many cases. We have various IT solutions in the offline environment that have various blocking mechanisms, identifying fraud, and increasing the synchronization rate to make sure that we catch fraud very quickly. And thirdly, we also work with the credit card acquirers, which I've mentioned. Now, passing on the charge is certainly not the end goal, but it's one way to say it's a problem that we're all facing. We need to fix it together. It's not something that the airlines should be paying for at the end of the day. And last but not least, I think it's very important that you're part of a network. So we can only fight that together. And with the 30 airlines, it doesn't matter if you're flying on a Ryanair flight yesterday or Lufthansa tomorrow or Aer Lingus the day after, we have the person that committed the fraud on the first flight already blocked for the following flights. So it's very important that you work or that you're engaged in a form of a network.
And I guess connectivity just adds to what Manuel's doing and just gives it superpower, because when you're doing that, chasing a fraud that's in progress on a flight and it's going to the next one, and often not within the same network but to another airline, having a connectivity means that you're going to be able to stop that at source and not be doing all this chasing in the rearview mirror. So the card's being declined or the fraudulent user is being identified in that seat at that time. I think it takes a lot of heat away from that problem in the cabin. Obviously, you don't want to be facing off with fraudsters at 35,000 feet. And the connectivity really is a simple solution, right? Is either, do I have an online connection, yes or no? And if I do, and certainly in our system, we've got tools that enable you to set either values or routes, so you know that on particular routes you're quite happy to sell sandwiches or product below, say, 10 euros, and that you're happy to process those offline because the fraud risk is low and you want the speed of being able to get everyone through. But if it's for larger value items and items that people aren't having to instantly consume, like a duty-free product, then we can ensure that every single transaction will go through as an online transaction. So it really is just making the system in the air look like what it would be in a pub garden or your favourite shopping hall. So it's quite simple. I think that the extra fun bit comes when we can start to bring in technologies like Livia's, where is being proactive on fraud, not just catching it at source.
Yeah. Hello. I think that so for us, the whole spirit behind what we do at Perseus is collaboration, right? Because you cannot fight fraud individually. So every so often we come across an airline and say, yeah, but we're all over our fraud. It's like, okay, good, but then what if that fraudster goes to another airline that is in your industry? Basically, what you want to do is you want to stop it. You don't want to pass it on. And I think this is really important. One of the best initiatives I think we participated in between 2012 and 2019 were the Global Airline Action Days. This was organized by Visa and Europol. And for a few days, they did about 12 of them. And for a few days each time, everybody would stopping fraud. That's not a double negative, but so basically they all agreed they wouldn't stop fraud for a few days. Travel agents, airlines, airports, and then you had the issuing banks, and we had law enforcement. So we had local law enforcement, we had Interpol, Europol. Everybody was participating in this. Over 12 airline action days, there were over 3,000 arrests. To your point, all organized fraud. And most of it, the fraud is just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it was human trafficking, so kids being trafficked. There was drug smuggling. There was all sorts of things, right? So it's really the importance of fighting this is really, really big. And we created a platform that enabled the merchants to peg to the issue in real time, so that it could be then passed on to law enforcement, so that they're not fighting it at 35,000 feet, but they're catching them at the airport. So I think this is where collaboration is really just across the industry.
Do we have any questions from the audience at this stage? Anybody got a burning question for our panelists? No? I've got one, don't worry. You talked about that flight attendants can be a first line of defense. That they. So how do you train a flight attendants to? Are they looking for a specific behavior? Is it literally just when the card declines? What does it look like, I guess, when somebody is trying to commit fraud in the cabin?
So we are as I mentioned in the beginning, an IT provider, technology provider, and we do think technology is key in that.
Yeah.
So the cabin crew needs to have the relevant information when the transaction is happening on board. That means be informed that the transaction is declined, that the card is blocked, that something is not working. Now, this doesn't automatically mean that this is fraud, obviously. So we need to train the crew to be able to respond and politely ask for another card. Yeah? At the same time, we have various protocols when passengers have an array of cards. When you start having more than 3 cards and you start having more transactions, I think we all have our light bulbs going up and saying something is not right. So we have various protocols in place that the cabin crew can professionally manage the situation and can simply decline the transaction. So we encourage the crew to decline a transaction when they go through the protocols and they see something doesn't add up, it doesn't work from our protocol side, but also when it doesn't work from their personal interaction with the passenger. And so we're very much, there's a lot of communication, activating the crew to make them aware that they are at the front with the passenger. Yeah, we can do a lot in the back end. We can go online. Hopefully there will be one day when every cabin is online. I'm not sure I will be able to get there. But so I think we will always need an offline default mechanism in place. But we need to make sure that the cabin crew who are at the forefront know what to do and can identify the fraud and simply stop the transaction.
Okay, and then let's go back to the actual retail programs again. I think staying with Manuel for this one. A lot of airlines have like a ceiling on how much products can cost that they're selling on board. You know, what is there like a standard for that where most airlines say, okay, I don't want to carry anything more than 100 pounds, or I won't do a single transaction over $200, or, you know, what's, I guess, the norm right now for airlines that are trying to be safe?
So it varies on the risk profile of the airline, and their focus as well on passenger satisfaction, retail profitability. But we do have one airline that has an 8,000 euro watch on board. Mm-hmm. So that's the exception, that's not the norm. But we are very flexible to work with the airline, which has a very strong fraud mechanism, protection mechanism in place at this point as well. And there's a lot more that happens in the background than with any of the other products that we have. But we, as the experts, don't want to be limited by fraud in terms of our creativity. Now, it does add lots of different layers of security protocol, of IT technology, but we think that this creativity that we have in the in-flight shopping, or the opportunity that we have in terms of the passenger experience, we don't want to be stopped by that at this point. And we hope, as we continue with the different innovations, that we can continue this path, because we think it's exciting. That's what makes us as a retailer.
Cool. Okay, and my next question is for you anyway. With regard to the LEO technology, what stage are you guys at in terms of deployment, and have you been successfully authorizing transactions either in a trial setting or with actual airline deployments so far?
Thanks for the question. LEO was a brainchild back, as I mentioned, pre-pandemic, but it launched officially last year, so we're up and running. We got nearly 20 aircraft fitted, so it's real, it's live. Most of our initial deployments have been for more of the passenger messaging side of it, but we've started doing all the trials on onboard retail, going extremely well. The LEO is a low Earth orbit technology, so it's not the typical type of connectivity that airlines have seen, which is the GEO, further away satellites. So the one big plus about LEO is it's closer to Earth. So the latency is very short, which means if you send a payment instruction, you're going to get back a message, whether it's a decline or a succeed, straight away, quite quickly. So it's probably the optimum technology for the solution it's solving. It's very much live, very much in the market, and ready to roll.
Okay, and I know Perseus had a conference recently in Malta, was it? And I know that AirFi was there, so I was just wondering, what learnings or findings or trends sort of came out of that conference, and then beyond that, just the nature of how you guys are, all three of you potentially, are planning to work together in the future.
Yeah, so we have an annual conference for our community. We're always open to new partners and merchants to join. But the purpose of it is, while we look quite specifically at payment fraud, the opportunity is for everyone to get together and share best practices, because collaboration in fighting fraud is really the ultimate aim. This year we also we did one that was around working group sessions on the hot fraud topics, and inflight fraud was one of them. Then the next day, with our sister company, we were looking at disputes and chargebacks, and inflight fraud came up again. So I think it's really becoming a very big issue. And we had probably one of the guys that knows about chargebacks the most that was there from MasterCard. And his number one chargeback issue was inflight fraud. So he went straight to talk to Martin, I believe. So I think it's something that's really big. We definitely need these partnerships in place if we're going to successfully fight it. I'm really hoping that together with AirFi and merchants like Retail Emotion and we have about 60 airlines in our community, that we can bring that on board. Quite literally, and online, so that we can actually start to fight yet another piece of the industry, because every time we fix one piece, they go and do something else. I mean, the stories I could tell on the ticketing side are incredible. So
I think there's two, as Livia's saying, there's two sort of key pressure points that I took away from the conference, both as you mentioned with the schemes, is one, that the fraud rate is running, like you said, above 2%. I don't think we really know exactly what it is. Obviously, people don't want to share all that detail, but it's roughly 2%, up to 10%. On some routes, I've heard 25%, which just means that they've shut their retail program down. It's too expensive.
Right.
So at 2%, the scheme rules for ticket sales is 0.1. So that's running at 20 times higher than it should be before you would be ordinarily fined in the scheme rules. So there's tension between the schemes and the acquirers and the merchants. And I think the other tension is obviously because, as I mentioned, prepaid is such an issue. The likes of Revolut and Monzo aren't particularly happy to be excluded from the in-flight sales arena. So that's another pressure, which is all conspiring against each other to say, look, the only way to relieve this is to go online, right?
While having latency that's working. I think when we talk about online, we also talk about latency, because that's what we see as quite big obstacle currently still. Because when you have an online transaction, for the crew to wait a minute or two for the latency to come back is too long. So that's something we also have to address. So the technology you mentioned earlier, the lower orbit, is crucial to remove that latency and therefore make the process seamless. Because that's what we want on board, that the crew is able to sell seamlessly without any interruption.
Absolutely.
Actually, it's a good point, and then something. Sorry, I just thought of it
That's
as you were saying. And maybe we need to discuss this further, because I'm always solutioning. But you could potentially let the transaction through, but because you've still got that connectivity, if afterwards you realize it's part of something bigger, then you still got the rest of the flight for that message to be sent to the ground also. So I think there could be other things that could be done. Maybe not ideal real-time connectivity like you have on the ground, but at least you could improve potentially what you're doing in between. Because if the earlier that we know about this authorization, the better it is.
So when you talk about that message being sent to the ground in that scenario you just explained, I guess the end goal there is to arrest that person when they get off the plane. Why do we want to send it to the ground?
I suppose it's so that you can actually, well, one is really, it's no longer in the pre-auth phase. So ideally what you want is the issuing bank to know about it pre-authorization.
Yeah.
Because this is the part of the chain that's being broken when it's in flight. So I think that for me, that's the priority. And if right now it's after the flight has landed, if it can be before, whether that could help. Like I said, I just thought of this on the fly, so need to check. The second piece in terms of the arrest, I think we've got to be quite careful there, right? So law enforcement will not generally be willing to act unless there's sufficient data. So part of what we did when
or
we
it's
were...
connecting that person to a much bigger crime problem.
Because you need enough evidence, right? An arrest cannot be made just like that. I'm an ex-lawyer, so I have a lot of that. But, so there's a lot of there's a lot of things that we need to think about, but potentially, yes, we would only pass information on, and it's up to them whether they want to act upon it, but every bit of information that adds to the data is always useful.
Yes, that makes sense. Okay, and this is just a question for all three. Where are we at in terms of awareness of this issue in the industry? Do you think we need to do a better job?
Much bigger now, Marianne.
Maybe we ask the audience. I'd be curious, who of you has had a discussion on in-flight payment fraud in the last month with your retailer or with your partner? I'd just be curious.
Hands up.
Hands up.
Come on, Sharon. Hands in the air. Every day.
So, I see only one hand, so I think we're far with some technology, with some cooperation, but I think one of the key pieces is engagement with the full value chain is something we need to work on.
I think if somebody can figure out how to prevent 2 to 10% of in-flight sales revenues being lost for their employer, they would be getting promoted.
Hello.
Right.
I need a new title, boss.
I haven't got any other questions. Is there any final words that any of the three panelists would like to share with everyone? No?
No, thank you. Been wonderful.
All right, that's great. Thank you, everybody.
Much.
Thanks, guys.